Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. As you are listening to this, I am out at the Game Awards in Los Angeles. This podcast is pre-recorded. As such, I will cover any news that I missed this week during next week's episode, but I think we have a good one for you this time around. A couple of weeks ago, we devoted the main segment to celebrating the 30th anniversary of one of my favorite games of all time, Donkey Kong Country. And now we have one of the most integral members of the development team responsible for that franchise. He was a character artist and art director at Rare, and now he spends his days working at another studio that I absolutely love, Playtonic. It's Kev Bayliss. Kev, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I'm just messing with my volume so I can hear you. Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join All Things Nintendo. You know, this has been, you've been one of the people that I've wanted to have on this show for a long time, and it's awesome that we're finally able to make it work.
Thanks for having me.
So, Kev, on All Things Nintendo, we have a tradition where we get to know debuting guests through the lens of their history with Nintendo. So the first part of this question I'm going to ask you is, what is your first memory with Nintendo?
My first memory with Nintendo would be Tim Stamper showing me the NES Rare when I went for my first interview there, when I went for my interview in 1987. And it was a machine that I'd never actually heard of because we were familiar with home computers in the UK, which would have been the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum. So I saw this grey, ugly slab of plastic, and I wasn't really convinced until I saw some of the games that were in development at Rare, which were Cobra Triangle at the time and the Wheel of Fortune game. And I just thought it looked great. It didn't sound as good as a Commodore 64 sounded, but it was certainly better looking than both the Spectrum and the 64. And so I knew it was a good machine. I just didn't like the way it looked and kind of missed it out, the fact that it had a keyboard. But the first game that I actually fell in love with and played on that was Castlevania by Konami. I thought it was really well put together, as Tim had recommended that I should play that before I went too far. And also the Double Dragon. I was a huge Double Dragon fan. And so the Double Dragon version for the NES, which obviously was a different game because it wasn't an arcade style scrolling beat 'em up anymore. It had to have a little bit more in the way of longevity to it, and so it was a much deeper game. But my first introduction to Nintendo itself would have been Donkey Kong in the arcades in the late 80s or mid 80s. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, I can remember seeing that in a local newsagents, and people were playing that, and I thought it was amazing. But my first hands-on experience would have been Castlevania. That's what made me appreciate the machine. So
that's kind of poetic that your first encounter with Nintendo was in fact Donkey Kong.
Yeah, a bit of irony there. It's every now and then I kind of pinch myself when I see the design and I see him there now on ads and how vastly different he looks to the original that was in the arcade. But there's absolutely no way anything would have crossed through my mind in that news agents, which I can remember the name of the place and where it was located in the hometown that I was living in, Tamworth in the Midlands in the UK, and thinking one day I'm going to redesign this character and it's going to be everywhere. So yeah, that was kind of an odd thing when I think about that. Yeah. So
that brings us to the second part of this question: is what is your favorite Nintendo game of all time? And you can totally say one of your own. Like, I'm not going to stop you.
Nintendo game on any system.
Yeah.
Are we going right the way through? I still have a lot of love for that NES Double Dragon. I really do like it. And also Castlevania 4, is it, on the Super Nintendo? Obviously, I like the games that we produced, but I kind of look at them differently because although they are great games, the magic isn't there for me. I look at them and I see a machine almost working correctly, and yeah, I remember rendering this graphic up and I know what code's doing that, and I remember the day that I said, can we do this instead here? So I remember seeing how maybe a particular feature was before it was modified. So to me, they don't look like games, they look like work. if you like. And so it's kind of a shame because I don't fully get to appreciate them unless I sit there and have a drink. And so if I'm sitting there and having maybe a glass of rum while streaming Diddy Kong Racing, and I fully appreciate how fun the game is, and also it shows how much fun we had making that game when I'm playing it. Because if it's making me laugh while I'm playing it, and it reminds me of that development process, and we had a great time putting it together too. So it sounds like a biased one, but I still really do enjoy playing DKR because it brings back all those memories too. So
It's such a great game, and I think one of the most underappreciated games in that era from Rare. Like, everybody always talks about
yeah,
Donkey Kong Country, and rightfully so. GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, Banjo Kazooie.
so
That
yeah.
But like Diddy Kong Racing, despite having a lot of love, everybody I ever talked to about Diddy Kong Racing is always like, "Oh my god, I love that game. I played the crap out of that game on N64. I wish they'd bring it forward."
It was always going to play second fiddle to Mario Kart because it was so well established and so well marketed. Diddy Kong Racing can get anywhere near the marketing and exposure that Mario Kart did. Why would they push that to compete with their own flagship racer? But as a game, it's a better game because it's
So
more
good.
it's more variety. There's more challenges. But and we pushed that system so hard. It would have been great if we could have got a few more frames per second out of it. But when we look at what we're doing on there, it's not surprising that the best we ever got on there was 30. But it still plays really well. So it's
It
a fun game.
does. And Diddy Kong Racing, one of the really beloved games that Rare put out on N64. But prior to that, the SNES era, I think, is where a lot of people really started getting familiarity with Rare's work through the Donkey Kong Country franchise.
Yeah.
And I looked at it when I was doing this Donkey Kong Country retrospective a couple weeks ago. And I was, because Rare had such a great history with the NES, they put out so many great games on the NES. And I was like, wait, they'd only put one game on SNES to that point, and that you actually had
Mhm.
done more games on the Genesis
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
the SNES up to Donkey Kong Country.
Oh,
Well,
there were a lot more projects on the Super Nintendo which never saw the light of day. I worked on, well, as we did on the NES, many titles that were canned,
mm,
just down to the fact that the game wasn't good enough or it needed another year's worth of development on it. And then the system was come to the end of its life. So we had to either decide we'll take this onto the next console and rebrand it or whatever. But the Super Nintendo, we put a lot of games together in development before we started playing with the 3D modeling and rendering, and they weren't really going anywhere. We were, well, what do we do with this Mode 7? Trying to work a game around that. I think we did the Battle Maniac, the Battletoads game,
hmm
which came out on there, and it looked great and everything, but it was just essentially a side-scrolling beat 'em up. There wasn't anything groundbreaking going on in it. But yeah, well, I worked on several different projects on and off for the Super Nintendo, and then we just got that SGI machine and started experimenting with that, and that just put everything in a different light. And so we obviously focused on that new technology, and we knew that people would notice those games if they had that style of 3D rendered graphics on it. And we were going to do a game anyway, whether it was the fighting game or another platform game or a Battletoads game or something. But when Nintendo saw what we'd actually been doing, they said, "Yeah, we want some of this," and obviously the rest history.
yeah. So it was Howard Lincoln that came and visited, right?
Yeah, they would come over fairly frequently. A few times a year, we'd get visits from Joel Hochberg, who was our American associate. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. He's kind of like a grandfather to me. Lovely guy, and he would often come over and set up deals with us and Nintendo, and he was our main correspondent. But sometimes he would come over accompanied by Nintendo or other companies. Maybe we were doing licensed products for LJN or Acclaim or whoever. But often Nintendo would come, and that one time in particular, they came over to see what we were doing with the SGI equipment. They saw the demo that I'd put together with Tim Stamper for the fighting game, which was Brute Force, I think we were going to call that originally,
hmm
because I'd always wanted to make a fighting game. And so the first thing I did was start building fighting characters with that hardware and experimenting, because we were just sort of left to our own devices with a heap of manuals and this new machine, and we had no guidance. We just kind of looked, sort of found our way around the software, made things really inefficiently, but they looked good. And when we saw that we could get something out of that, we started putting together some kind of demo. And it was around that time that Sega and Nintendo were pretty much head to head on the TV commercials, and the new film Aladdin had become this major blockbuster movie from Disney. And the next thing you know, Sega have got this amazing looking Aladdin game with Disney animation, authentic Disney animation, and it just looked great. And I think Nintendo were a little bit worried about that. And when they heard what we were doing and they saw the models moving around on the fighting game demo, there's nothing that looks like this. This looks better than in whatever. It's a subjective thing, I guess, but it looks different. Yeah, the Aladdin game looked great and it animated fantastically. It was beautiful, but it didn't look like this new style of rendering, which looks so solid. And so the next thing happened was they had a meeting during that day, I can remember, and we'd all dressed a little bit smartly, as we all would when Nintendo came to visit. No jeans, make sure we had a nice shirt on in case we went out for a meal with them later that evening. But Tim came into my office after they'd seen the demo, and he said, "We're going out for a meal now. You did good, Kevin. They like it. Go home now. I'll see you tomorrow." So I went home, and then the next day Tim came and says, "Yeah, they want you to remodel this." And I'd got a heap of faxes straight away with pictures of Donkey Kong, which I've still actually got. I've still got them in a folder.
Oh, wow.
With all the modifications that they wanted to them. And I pretty much skimmed through them because I wanted to rush it, because I wanted to get back onto my fighting game. And I just basically put some Battletoads eyes onto the DK character and built that. And they loved it. But they just said, "Can you put a tie on the character so that it's got some kind of identity?" And yeah, we just started building up the team, and Nintendo then decided to take a larger stake in the company and start providing with as many tools as we needed, software and hardware. And then the team era was born at Rare, and we started to recruit a lot more people, trying to find people that were actually experienced with 3D modeling, more software engineers, better audio. We needed to really step up our game with the development teams. And so we built and converted the several barns which were dotted around the farmhouse premises, and it all got very sort of high tech and very secure because of the amount of equipment that we were suddenly using at the company. And yeah, it suddenly transformed in a year. The place went from sleepy farmhouse building with this going on upstairs on the top floor and a little bit of development over here to this rather corporate, newly fitted out, newly carpeted barn system where we'd got teams all working with all these high-end SGI machines. So.
Yeah, and I mean, those SGI machines, presumably you were getting them to work on N64 and other 3D console titles. Was there like a moment of like eureka when you're like, oh, we could use these to pre-render these sprites and these characters for SNES?
We were Tim was looking at them. We used to draw on large draftman's boards filled with LED strips, it's like fluorescent tube strips, like you would sort of get in a sun tanning machine. And you would put your paper on the NES on that, and you'd trace your image, and you put graph paper on the top, and you would hand draw over the top with pencils and then pens and box it all off and do everything very organically and traditionally. And then you'd put all the data onto a disc, and that's how we used to do it on the NES. But that couldn't happen on the Super Nintendo because you got so many more colors to decode. And so we needed to move into a pixelated digital input system, we needed to create our own editors, and so we used our own hardware for that. And that was the era of the Super Nintendo graphics. We were drawing images on paper and taking a snapshot of those pictures with a camcorder, feeding those directly into the 2D editor that we'd created, which was kind of like a deluxe paint clone. And that's how our images were put together, until one day Tim was sitting there with his great big drafts board still in his office, because we used those to draw whatever we were going to draw before we took snapshots of them. And he'd got all these brochures of these, what looked like CAD brochures, showing the typical Formula One car with a green wireframe wheel and tire, sort of blending into a full rendered car to show that the thing had been engineered. And I was looking at it and I thought, oh, he's thinking about buying himself a Formula One car now, because he was forever outside of development for games. He was always into different fads. And one of those fads was actually small single-seater racing cars, very similar to Formula One, but with a much smaller size. And so I thought, oh, he's back into that again. But it wasn't. He was actually looking at 3D graphics. And he explained to me what it was. And I said, well, how are we going to do that on the Super Nintendo? We've got 8 frames of pixels, which we were able to digitize from our camcorder pictures. This is what movies generate their graphics with, or it's used for high-end TV commercials. And I didn't understand where we could go with it. He said, well, we just want to try it and think about the future. And there wasn't any thought of generating things for the N64 or 3D full real-time rendering or anything. It was just, I think, something he wanted to experiment with. And then we got one machine, and because we were having a bit of a move around at the time, Tim went upstairs into a different office and bought the newer machine, and they were incredibly expensive. It was sort of 30,000, 40,000 pounds a piece back in 1989, 1990, whenever it was. It would have been early 90s. And the software, we were looking at the best software, and we settled on the software called Power Animator, which is now called Maya today. And that was the most expensive software, but it was also the best. But all that software is incredibly expensive. So we figured if you're going to spend £25,000 on some software, you may as well spend £30,000 on it, because, you know, it's neither here nor there when you were spending those kind of pounds. So we bought one license, and I started playing with that downstairs, and of course building a Chrome fighting character. And then Tim went upstairs and started playing around with making spaceships and stuff like that with his new machine. So we'd bought 2 of these machines for the company and broke the bank with 2 machines and 2 seats of this software. And I was very lucky to be the person using it downstairs and just left to my own devices, as I said. But we did all kinds of tests. I remember Tim modeling a American football helmet, and there was a game we were going to call First Down. I can remember he was rendering a title page, and I started playing around because I was still coming to the end of the development of the Battletoads arcade game. Excuse me. And I started playing around with the end level, which was very similar to the end level of Double Dragon arcade game, where you were walking along a red carpeted palace. And we had sprite scaling capability. So we were making these sprites get bigger and come towards you. And we had this section where these huge, great big steel balls rolled out towards the camera. And I thought, wouldn't it be good if I can render sort of 15 degrees worth of looping animation on a ball in Maya, Power Animator at the time, and then we can scale that at the same time, and it looked like it'd be rotating towards the camera. Put a round elliptical shadow underneath it without any need for any definition, and it worked. So then I converted that to a sprite, and we reduced the number of colors, and it was just a black and white 16 shades of gray ball, so it worked really well. So then I got a little bit more adventurous, and I built the Battletoads logo like a ship, and I made it tilt and sort of yaw and pitch a little bit like this, and I rendered sort of 15 frames of that. and I kept it in monochrome again, so that it had a good 15 colors to capture all of the shades. And we put that in, and it worked. And so we knew that it would work, but we were just kind of waiting for some hardware to arrive that had better capability, high resolution, and more colors. And that didn't happen because we were already working on something that was pretty similar to the Raz board, which was our arcade machine. But we had good software engineers who were able to create good algorithms to work out and average the amount of colors through a set of maybe 20 animation frames and pick a palette which suited all of the colors that Maya was rendering out, Power Animator, sorry, and convert it into a lower resolution. And when we put it onto that slightly blurred CRT monitor on the Super Nintendo, it looked amazing. And I can remember a guy speaking to me in the pub that actually had something to do with this company that was supplying the software to us. And he says, "Why are you wasting your time with this stuff? It's not going to look right. It's why are you putting all this extra effort into that? Wait for technology to get there." And I said to him, "It already looks great. We're doing this." And I remember he shook my hand a year later in the same pub and said, "I never thought it would work, but once those graphics start moving, and as you can see by the results that we got on the 3-color Game Boy, as long as those graphics were moving, they held up, and you'd got your mind filled in all the gaps. And so the shadowing and the specular highlighting on those characters instantly made them look solid. And so we knew that it worked. And I guess we thought then that we would continue with that tech and that kind of routine of rendering graphics out and putting them then on the next system, which we could have bigger sprites and more colors. And then everything changed, and the N64 introduced real-time 3D, and we had to take a step back because we'd become spoiled because we could render anything we wanted, any resolution, and we would convert it down to whatever we needed it to be for the Super Nintendo or for Killer Instinct on the arcade, which gave us more frames and larger sprites. But suddenly we were reduced to less polygons, and we had to learn to use polygons, and I'd never done that before. We were modeling directly with a format called NURBS, which was a curve-based, four-sided media, if you like, that was a 3D graphic sort of procedure to create 3D objects made out of tiles, almost sheets with a flat square texture on. But the polygonal modeling was a very different technique, and so I had to rewind, re-educate myself with polygons, and make the use of tiny, tiny little textures and distribute those using what they call UV maps to map that texture to each face. So that was a different technique that we had to learn, and we knew how to use the software, but we had to kind of adapt to creating graphics for that new N64. And I'd already begun making graphics the old-fashioned way, which to me was building a NURBS model and then hoping to project those curves, those textures onto low poly models for a fighting game, which I wanted to do on the N64. But we canned that idea, and I actually had a car accident at the time, so I had to take some time off. And when I returned back to Rare, everybody was fully established with the N64 and working on these projects because I had quite a bit of time off. But there was this one team which still hadn't become established yet. There was still just a designer and one artist who was a new artist who hadn't really got any experience with 3D modeling. So he was also learning the ropes. And I, fortunately, Chris Stamper didn't want me on that team. It was a game called Adventure Racers. It was going to be a super cute, cuddly racing game sickeningly cute. I didn't really want to go on to there, but because I wanted to do another fighting game or KI3, whatever it would have been. But then Tim said to Chris, "You need to get Kevin on there because he's going spare and he's a character guy, and you haven't got any characters." And then when I saw the designs of this adventure racing game, which then became RC Pro Am and became Diddy Kong Racing, the team sort of established as that game developed, and it was basically people that were all racing Formula One enthusiasts and racing game enthusiasts, and it was just a lot of fun to make. And so it was a learning curve because I'd never actually done any 3D polygonal modeling, and so we were using some other software called Ningen, Multigen, I think it was called at the time, which was used to create flight simulators, which was very cumbersome. But we worked alongside Alias Wavefront, who owned the software Power Animator, and we were on a beta testing scheme with them, and we worked very closely with them sometimes, and they were going to create a new piece of software called Inca for video games and Maya for film. And I think they ended up throwing away the idea of two different pieces of software because they could envision that essentially they were going to be needing the same tools at some point. And so we worked with them, and we got the first versions of Maya, and that had a lot of features that we needed to develop games directly on the N64. And that was our new pipeline: Maya, Photoshop, and whatever hardware we were given and whatever engine that the guys created in-house at Rare. So yeah, it was quite a journey from NES to N64. Very, very different, dramatic changes in tech.
Yeah,
And I'm very lucky
like
to have been there during that time because that's not going to happen again.
Yeah, I mean, just the leaps ahead over that like 8 or 9 year period was incredible. And you've referenced this guy quite a few times now. So I think we've got to get to this story real quick because you talked about how the design process was somewhat passive with Donkey Kong and the redesign of that character. But for people who are listening to this show who may not be aware, you are the creator of Diddy Kong. So
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
so I guess like
He's my
that was
baby.
that seems like a much more hands-on process than what you described as putting Battletoad's eyes on the existing kind of inspired by the arcade DK
Yeah.
model and then a tie as suggested by Nintendo.
I mean, Donkey Kong is Shigeru Miyamoto's baby. He invented that character way before. As I said, when I was in the newsagents, that guy was already at the top of the girders with Mario trying to come and rescue the lady at the top. But so I got the opportunity to redesign him. And I guess I'm responsible for the redesign because he's a different shape. I actually based him on the shape of a mountain gorilla that was at our local zoo that we were very lucky to have close by at Rare. And I'd already developed the Battletoads. And so to make him look noticeably different, and I saw the characteristic on the gorilla at the zoo always looked kind of disgruntled and not happy, unfortunately. So I did this kind of angry looking McDonald's banana shaped eyebrow. And it was basically the Battletoads eyes, and it worked because it had that dark sort of area either side of the eyeballs. And I just put that together and changed his shape slightly. But not long after developing DK, I was just going to get back onto working on the Killer Instinct characters. And Greg Mayles, the lead designer on Donkey Kong Country, came and said, "We need another character. It's got to be DK Jr." And so I started making DK Jr. and Greg said that we need him to have a tail though, because he needs to do this and that. And he needs to be a little bit more sprightly than the old design. And it was such a departure from the original design of DK Jr. And also, I think it wasn't that long before that he'd actually made his appearance in Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo. So I think to redesign him completely and put him in a different style may have been a dangerous thing to do because I know Nintendo, the reason they gave us Donkey Kong for me to redesign was because he hadn't seen the light of day for a good 10 years. So, it was time for a facelift, and a new look DK. But rather than use our Diddy design as DK Junior, he says, well, let's make this a new character completely. I mean, he wasn't an ape; he was a monkey because he'd got the tail. And so I designed Diddy, and I heavily based him, I guess, on the Cocoa Pops cereal guy that we got in the UK. I don't know what they're called in the US or throughout the world, but the Kellogg's cornflakes, Kellogg's Ricicles, Kellogg's Frosted Flakes or Frosties all had their own character, didn't they, on the front of the box? And so the DK character, DK Junior character, which I made, which became Diddy, was what I remember seeing as a kid, which was a monkey on the front of a box with a t-shirt and a cap on. So I basically did that. I perhaps rushed him a little bit because I just wanted to get back onto my fighting game. But I'm so glad that I made him now because he's a fun looking character. He's a silly looking character. And not only did he, sorry to pun, not only did he start in DKC and then had his own series of games, DKC 2, etc. It was when we got so far through what was RC Pro-Am, Adventure Racers, that Nintendo came along and said, can you put that main character, Diddy Kong, in there because he's not going to affect Mario Kart because he doesn't sit in Mario Kart. He's from a different environment, different universe. We can market that way better when people know what they're getting. Whereas RC Pro-Am was this tiger, which nobody knew, and some other characters which were a little bit oddball up until the point that we decided to put Banjo in, who now everybody knows, and Conker.
Conker, yeah.
And just change that logo from RC Pro-Am to Diddy Kong. So I put him in and made some adjustments to the start sequence that I'd already put together with the N64 logo, and I made the plane go around there with this fantastic little animation editor that Rob Harrison, the main software engineer on the game, had put together. I just put this little plane or a car or whatever vehicle on a path. I could plot this path down and move the curve so the path moved around. It looked like a long strip of tape. And I could send my vehicle around that, and I put an N64 logo and I just put a rotation on it, and it just sat there, and I put a sky behind that. And when you got to each point on this curve, I could trigger certain events like a particle effect or a sound effect. So I'd trigger the laughing of the babies, which are actually Tim and Chris's, Tim's kids.
What? I didn't know that.
And everything it was such a good editor. And I look at it now and it probably looked very simple. And we took that and vamped that up for Dinosaur Planet 2. But that was the start of it. That being able to play with 3D in a 3D environment and use that editing system to create animations, it suddenly opened up the world of 3D, and it was just a lot more exciting to develop games in that way than it was doing it predominantly on paper and then in 2D. Suddenly we'd got this world to play with, and so I started having fun putting sequences together for no reason, and also allowed me to cut corners. And I thought, well, why do I have to do a player select screen? I can use the models I've already built. In fact, I'll just put a 2-tier set of hills and I'll line the characters up and I'll just position my there it works. I'll play a dance movement and I'll put the music that Dave's done, and then I'll do an animation of them holding a board, and then Rob triggered everything in software, and that animation tool was so important to creating the game, and it kind of gave you the incentive to continue with everything because you knew that you could see what you see is what you get, and it was there. And I remember Chris Stamper walking through because he had to leave the team because he was on with managing the company. Really, he really wanted to create Diddy Kong Racing, but he left us to our own devices to get on with that. And he just walked down this corridor one day and he just stopped and he could see that I was in the middle of putting the sequence together with, it was Timber controlling a remote control car running around the racetrack. And the camera panned out to show that it was a radio control car with Timber controlling it, this little version of Timber. But I scrubbed all of that. And that's when I eventually made the new start with Diddy coming in and landing down next to Pipsy. And then Timber came along the back. And they all came in 3 different vehicles to show it wasn't just a car racing game. And Chris just looked at it and says, "This is great. Rob's giving Kevin a tool and they're just getting on with it and it's working. And I can see it works." And then Dave would give me the music. And I just thought, I've got to put a start sequence to this. And I think I was the first guy to put a start animation, almost cartoon together. And I married up as many little shots and cutscenes as I could, all in real time with this camera. It was so clever what you could do with it, even though it was only very basic. And I just sync things in with the music, and didn't storyboard anything. I just made it up as I went along. And I said, well, when Timber came over the waves, he kind of had this slide guitar which screamed of Hawaii, and it sounded great. And then different elements of music would come in for different characters. So I'd introduce banjo when the kazooie would come on, and then I thought, well, I want Whizpig running along now, and what can I do? Oh, there's a log. I can make him hit the log, and then it just sort of fell into place. And then the camera at the end, the plane did that kind of loop and went into the camera, and I think it worked. And we showed it to, I think it was Edge magazine or somebody. They came to look, and I went into the meeting room with Simon Farmer to show him what we'd done. And the 2 guys just looked at each other and just started laughing as they were watching this start sequence come up. And we knew we'd done something good with that, but it's almost like I didn't want to make games anymore. I wanted to just direct these little silly movies. And so I started playing with all the sequences, like when Taj would come over in the carpet and the conga section, and when Whizpig appears from behind the lighthouse. Everything suddenly became every asset you could kind of play with it and do something with it. And so things took on a different role. And I think we'd built that lighthouse, but we were always kind of trying to decide what to do with it. And then Lee said, wouldn't it be great if that was a rocket? And it goes off to space, and said, well, we can make that sprout wings and do all kinds of stuff now and shake the camera. And it just opened up all the doors, that 3D, almost being a little director of movies. You could say, this is what we want to do. Look, I'm making it happen here. Now we just need to make the code do this or whatever. And so it was a great way of experimenting and trying things out. And if it works on camera, we can make it work in games. So it was such a fun game to work on. It really was.
And it shows. It's one of those games. There's every once in a while there are games that come out and you're like, oh, they must have had a blast making this game. And I think that Diddy Kong Racing is certainly one of those games. Now, Kev, I know we're running a little short on time, but I did want to ask you about what it's like as the person who is responsible for these designs of Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong, to maybe go to the movie theater near you and then see the Super Mario Brothers movie and see your old friends up on the silver screen.
I still haven't seen the movie yet.
Oh, wow.
I was expecting to get a premiere. That would have been nice, an invite to go and see it.
And we could have all there. We could have
enjoyed that. So, but no, my wife's not so into Pixar movies and that kind of style of DreamWorks. So I kind of watch anything like that that's animated on my own. And I'd rather watch that with somebody or a group of people that I can watch. And I think Playtonic actually took a trip to go and watch it, but I missed out on that. I think I was away on holiday or something. But I'll watch it. I'll definitely see that. But somebody asked me the same question a couple of weeks ago when I was at a retro gaming convention in the UK in Doncaster. And when I was there, of course, I was surrounded by Donkey Kong merchandise and games. And you kind of forget that you made him, which is odd. I've got him in my room. I've got a plushie and I've got some games there behind me. But he kind of washes over me. It's almost like I didn't create him because I know he's Nintendo's IP, as is Diddy. And I know I'm the father of Diddy, as I put it, because I am. I gave birth to that creature. But when I look at them, I just kind of appreciate them for what they are. And for me, they're very much just part of Nintendo. And I had a hand in creating them and helping those characters become established. And because I think had we have not experimented with 3D graphics when we did, there may be we'd have reached this stage now where games look amazing on every console, even on a mobile phone. We were always going to get to this point, but I do think we kickstarted something. And because of the being in the right time and the right place, and me being lucky enough to get that job at Rare, and also lucky enough to be really into my fighting games and trying to persuade Tim to get me to allow me to build something, opened up that door for Nintendo to come along and see what we're doing, to spark their interest so much that they said, we need to see our characters using this technology. And so I'm forever grateful for that, because without that hardware, without that opportunity at Rare, and without Nintendo saying, build this, because, you know, it's one of the biggest things and we're going to market it. The same as when they came through with Diddy Kong Racing. There's always a lot of there's sometimes some negativity about us changing a license from Dinosaur Planet to Star Fox Adventures and RC Pro-Am to Diddy Kong Racing. It happens for a reason, and it happens for the better. You've still got that story of the original game, which every game has its history of development, and that's great. But ultimately, people see these products, and there's a lot of work going into them, and Nintendo have to be absolutely sure they can market that, and they do a great job of making sure everybody knows about the characters, and they're done and shone in the correct light, and they're in the right game, in the right movie. And so I'm really honored that I got the chance to design something which will be here hopefully long after I'm gone. I'll be forgotten, I'm sure, but DK and Diddy will get several facelifts throughout the decades, I'm sure, but they'll still always be Nintendo's babies, and I love the fact that I helped create and created the original models, which at the right time and in the right place and in the right circumstances kickstarted this new look of video games, which could have gone in a number of directions, I think, and certainly Diddy Kong probably wouldn't even exist. I'm pretty sure we would have got Donkey Kong some point, and Nintendo perhaps would have developed them themselves once they discovered the benefits of using 3D modeling. But Diddy maybe never have even been created, because they might have just gone straight ahead and say, right now we need to build DK Jr. too. So it's fortunate that Greg said we need a character with a tail. And it's fortunate that I enjoyed Cocoa Pops when I was a kid. And also just wanted to get onto my fighting game, because that's why Diddy looked like he did. So, but yeah, it washes over me, but every now and then I do a pinch myself and I think, wow, you did that, because I've done all the other characters, Killer Instinct and Battletoads, and they were amazing games to work on. Killer Instinct in particular, because that whole motion capture thing I got involved with, that was all new technology again. And all those characters have either got my voices or my motion capture or my artwork, and I built them. But I don't think they've got that longevity that the Kongs have got, and I think they'll always be there, and they appeal to kids without having to rip heads off and slay. It's a nice character to have been involved with. So
For sure. And, I do want to give a quick shout out to Playtonic, which is the studio you were currently at. A lot of Rare alumni there, and, putting out fantastic games like Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. Yooka-Laylee is on the horizon. I hope it's kind of capturing that same magic that you guys had back in the 90s.
I mean, we've recently moved to a new premises and we've got a swanky new building now. We had overgrown our first, well, we'd moved office several times as the company expanded, but now we've got a much better equipped, lovely building. And I go there, I sit next to Mark Stevenson, who I interviewed 20 odd years ago as an artist, and now he's my manager. um, I'm with Steve Mayles from Donkey Kong Country and Banjo Kazooie. We've got some of the old guys there that worked on some of the teams at Rare, as you say, but we've also got a lot of new blood and a lot of new talent there, which is great because you've got this new sort of lease of life and enthusiasm, and they'll look at things in a different way to perhaps I'll look at it. And so we have this real kind of melting pot of ideas now. But also I'm loving the fact that I'm in game development still, and I'm loving the fact that I'm working with people that I know as friends, and I've met so many new friends. But also, I've now begun working with people in Norway with an education project to get kids involved in video game creation, keeping them off the streets, trying to help prevent online bullying and give them something constructive to do. And also show now that, unlike in the 80s when I joined the industry, it is a thing. It is an industry that you can follow, a career that you can follow. As someone that's been in the industry for almost 14 years now.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Oh my God. It's 1987. I took a step out for about 10 years, but it's since 1987. It's a fair amount of time to be involved in game development. It's nice to be telling people the tools that you've got and the companies that exist, and you can try and get involved in making these amazing games now with like-minded people or join a team. And it is a thing. It's no longer this fad that my parents and many other parents thought was going to fade within 5 years. It's still here. It's huge. And so we're trying to implement that into the schools in Norway at the moment, and it seems to be taking off extremely well. So I think I'm going to be splitting my time between Norway and Playtonic over the next 12 months, and we'll see what happens from then onwards. But it's great to be. Sounds cliche, but it's great to be giving something back rather than just creating graphics too. So it's nice to see 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds putting their hands up and going away and coloring in pixelated characters that I've designed, or 16, 17-year-olds getting involved in a design task that I've set them. So I'm in a good place at the moment, and I'm really appreciative of the video game industry for giving me that. So
That's fantastic. And, Yooka-Laylee is a great spiritual successor like Banjo Kazooie. The Impossible Lair is a great spiritual successor to Donkey Kong Country. I'm holding out hope that you guys do a spiritual successor to Diddy Kong Racing next, but maybe that's
who
just me being
knows? We
selfish.
have many different projects that we're working on at Playtonic, and obviously I can't tell you about them, but we're also a publisher, and we've got people who have been connected to a lot of the great games that Rare created back in the day. And so, yeah, we've got all genres covered. And there's some exciting titles coming in the future, I'm sure, for you all. But at the moment, my job's quite good because I'm quite varied. I work on a lot of different sort of vertical slices of different projects that we're working on, which is great because it means that I get a change in my work every few months. But I am looking forward to Yooka-Laylee myself because I've not been hands-on with the main game. I've been involved in it, but not in to the level that I was when we did the first version in 2015. So, I stream now on Twitch, and I'm looking forward to actually playing that with fresh eyes. And I've deliberately turned my eyes away from it so I don't see all of the secrets and all of the new stuff that they've put in that game, because it's not just a reskin; it's an evolution of the original. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to streaming that so people can see my genuine reaction to stuff that's changed. And I can't believe it's been 10 years since we put that out.
That even makes me feel old, and I didn't even work on that game, but I remember reviewing it. But I'm looking forward to playing Yooka-Laylee as well. But that wraps up this episode of All Things Nintendo. Kev, thank you so much for joining me for this episode and being so gracious with your time. This was a fantastic conversation. I can't wait for everybody to hear it.
Yeah, hopefully we can do it again sometime, but thanks for having me on. And yeah, I look forward to playing Yooka-Laylee. It's a great way to, I think mostly it was a great way to celebrate the fact that the company had also been around for 10 years. And so we thought, let's launch something new, but something that people can relate to. And so it was a good celebration of 10 years. So yeah, looking forward to that too. But thanks very much for having me on again. And hopefully we can do it again.
Yeah, I'll look forward to that next conversation that we have. And I'll definitely look forward to playing Yooka-Laylee. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. As you know, the Patreon and the associated Discord server are the best way to get any questions or comments in, but you can also get in touch with me, Brian at allthingsnintendo.com, or hit me up on social media at Brian P. Shea. That is also my YouTube handle, and if you would subscribe to that channel, it would help me out a lot. Kev, do you have anything to plug on the way out?
I use all social media. If I'm on social media, it's Kev_Bayliss. But if you follow me on Twitch, I'm going to do a Twitch stream right now, actually, on whatever today's date is. As I say, I'll play the old games that I've worked on and try and complete those and rip them apart or show concept art and stuff. And that's twitch.tv/Kev Bayliss. I think maybe Kev_Bayliss. Who knows? You'll find me anyway. I'm the nerdy looking guy with Diddy Kong.
Well, we'll have your handles in the show notes as well if people want to find you on social media or Twitch. But That is our show for this week. Thank you again for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. Before we wrap up this episode of All Things Nintendo, I just want to give a special shout out to the $10 patrons of the All Things Nintendo podcast. Aaron Smith, Abdullah, Adam Scott, Elena R., Alex Stadnick, Andy Junkins, Ben Richland, Chain Whippin, Chaps My Ass, Chris Calley, Colton Bredlau, Dan Norman, Derek Sigmund, Dusty Beeman, Ian T. Clark, Jackal, Jason Thompson, Jawar Hello, Jill Grote, Johnny Five, Jordan Sloat, Jose Villalobos, Joseph Jury, Joshua DeProy, Justin Childress, Cody Gibson, Creeper207, Lindsay Hartz, Mad Genie Confused Koala, Marshall Thompson, Megan S., Michael Anderson, Nintendo 101, Paul at Drunk on Mako, Philip G. Cox, Pratable, Rob McCann, Bobby Mac 265, Robert Sousa, Roger Reichert, Russell Sayer, Scott Matthews, Sir Phobos, Smithy Poo, Tux DC, Wham Bam Sam the Gaming Man, Zach Marcus, Zachary Pliggy, and Zek 3 Sword Sama. Thank you so much for continuing to listen to and support the All Things Nintendo podcast.